Well, it's not revenue neutral unless you take away the deduction.
That's where that.
I know, but I have to.
Let me just.
You haven't given me the math.
No, but I don't have the. It would take me too long to go through all of the math.
Great answer.
2012 flashback, courtesy of Stephen Colbert, who, by the way, takes over for CBS Slate Show in September, and David Letterman. Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan, they stumbled in 2012 with their plan to slash taxes by 20% across the board. The problem, the math just didn't add up. Fast forward to 2016, the New York Times asked whether Republicans can avoid the Romney tax trap. So far, Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, and Ben Carson all support the flat tax, the same tax rate for everyone, regardless of income. Mike Huckabee favors what he calls the fair tax, or a national sales tax to replace income tax. So let's bring in Grover Norquist, knows a little bit about taxes himself. He's the president of Americans for Tax Reform. Mr. Norquist, thanks for joining us.
Good to be with you.
So what do you think is going to be the winning formula for Republicans when it comes to a tax plan and avoid the pitfalls of a Romney-Ryan ticket like we saw in 2012?
One of the advantages is that the CBO and joint tax will score dynamically. So by cutting rates and cutting the capital gains tax, you can actually generate more revenue. The dynamic models show that. And so it'll be easier to have the numbers add up if you're not using static model. That said, they'll all be step one, don't raise taxes. Step two, reduce marginal tax rates. And Rubio is looking at increasing the per-child exemption as well. So I think they'll all have robust tax cuts, and they will score better because the CBO recognizes people change behavior when you cut taxes.
Grover, Heather Hansen here. I think you know that there was an ABC Washington Post poll that said 74% of the public who was polled said that they would vote for a candidate who did not sign your pledge. Given that, and given that President George H.W. Bush signed and then actually raised taxes, do you feel as though perhaps the pledge has lost its relevance?
That's a question I get about every 6 months. And a majority of the members of the House of Representatives have signed the pledge and kept it. As long as the Republicans, who've most of them taken the pledge, held the House, Senate, or the presidency, taxes have not been raised. Since the Republicans took the House back in 2010, no tax has been increased. So the tax pledge holds taxes down, has successfully stopped tax increases, and 96% of the American people think they pay the right amount or too much. So 4% of Americans want higher taxes.
Grover, it's Rick Unger. So, you have been effective, clearly, in keeping much happening in terms of higher taxes. But I know that what you'd really love to see happen is lowering of taxes. How can this ever happen in this country when you have the two biggest expenditures being defense and social programs, and you have part of the population who always wants to increase one or the other, while the other part is against it? Do we ever really get lower taxes, or do we just now stop raising taxes because of somebody like yourself?
Well, step one is don't raise taxes, and thank you, but it's not me, it's the American people who enforce the Taxpayer Protection Pledge. I have one vote. The American people throw out people who vote for tax increases, starting with George Herbert Walker Bush, and anyone else who tends to move in that direction. But I think we have a real opportunity to reduce taxes across the board, because with the sequester for the next 10 years, there's very real limitations on spending increases, and that includes defense spending. For the first time, they're talking about reducing the number of people who are civilian employees in the Pentagon. They're beginning to talk about acquisition reform, which is 30 years overdue. Only the limits on spending have begun the conversation about reforming the Pentagon to effectively provide our defense without wasting as much money.
Hey, Grover, I want to talk briefly about Oregon real quick. It's set to become the first state in the nation to implement a pay-per-mile tax trial program. And drivers basically will have their total mileage recorded and then charged 1.5 cents per mile. They then get credit to offset the fuel at the tax pump. But do you like this idea?
No, this is being put forward as a way to raise taxes and make people not realize it.
And finally, Brad, I know you had a question.
Yeah, Grover, hi, it's Brad Hirschfield. I want to kind of think
Brad.
big with you for a second. It seems to me we're never going to get sound tax policy in this country until we admit the real divide is there are some of us who believe taxes are to pay bills, and others believe it's to redistribute wealth. It's a fairness deal. How do we advance that conversation? Because it seems to me, if you agree with me, we're not going to be able to move on taxes in any meaningful direction until we really surface what the fight is about. And I don't think it's about the numbers. I think it's about the theory that animates them.
Well, and also if you look at some of the programs we have, such as the pensions, which are pretty expensive, if you move from defined benefit pensions to defined contribution, you can dramatically reduce the cost and still make sure everybody gets a pension that's really there as opposed to one that disappears. We reform government to cost less. And that's with welfare programs and with the Pentagon. You can drop government spending, but reform of spending comes first, tax cuts come next.
Okay, very good. Well, Mr. Norquist, we appreciate you joining us. Enjoy your Memorial Day weekend, and your input was excellent. Again, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, so we only have about 30 seconds to discuss, but any impressions from what
Well,
Grover said?
look, I like Grover. He's a good guy, but I got to tell you, I've just never agreed with the concept of anybody promising not to do something that might have to be done.
Heather.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the concern I think the American public has. You know, that's why they say that they would rather vote for someone who won't make the pledge, because they don't want someone promising to do something that they may have to do.
Yeah, litmus testing is not the way to go on almost any issue. It doesn't make for good policy. Talk about what you believe in, but litmus tests, they're not good.
You surprised that Jeb Bush didn't sign this pledge?
No, I think it takes a real courage to
I
do
do
it, and I
too.
appreciate it enormously that he didn't. There's a lot of reasons inside the party to do it, and he said, no, I don't do that.
Okay.
Huntsman didn't do it either, and I liked that.
Yeah, I was about to say Huntsman didn't do it, and we
Yeah.
saw how it worked out for him.
Yeah,
so you
but that's
wonder
different.
with
That's
conservatives-
different.
It's different.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not what
He's
did
not-
in John
yeah,
Huntsman.
right.
Right.
That's true. Abby Huntsman, by the way, made the 50 hottest
That's right.
news
She was the
people
first one on there.
voted by Mediaite.
For
I
good
wasn't
reason.
involved with that.
Yes.
Anyway, coming up next, we head to Baltimore for big news on the death of Freddie Gray. This is the Daily Wrap. Stay right there.